Peter M. Senge was named a strategist of the century by the Journal of Business Strategy, one of 24 men and women who have had the greatest impact on the way we conduct business today. While he has studied how firms and organizations develop adaptive capabilities for many years at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, it was Peter Senge book, The Fifth Discipline, that brought him firmly into the limelight and popularized the concept of the learning organization. Since its publication, more than 1 million copies have been sold, and in 1997, Harvard Business Review identified it as one of the seminal management books of the past 75 years. On the page, we explore Peter Senge's vision of the learning organization. We will focus in this video on the arguments in his book, The Fifth Discipline, as it is here we find the most complete exposition of his thinking. So according to the book of Senge, Senge details 5 learning disciplines and 7 learning disabilities. First discipline is the personal mastery. Learning organizations can only exist through individuals who learn and exhibit high levels of personal mastery, and they live life creatively rather than reactively, and continually recreate themselves through improvement in competence, skills, spiritual growth, and etc. Their spirit for learning and growth form that of the organizations pursuing personal mastery is a lifelong process, and you never finish learning. You cannot force someone to embark on the path of personal growth. As a leader, you can encourage personal mastery by 1. Creating a conducive climate and make it safe for people to create visions, inquire and commit to the truth, and challenge status quo. Number 2 is developing all 5 learning disciplines concurrently in the organization so they can strengthen or reinforce one another. Then lastly, being a role model by committing to your own personal mastery. Second discipline is the mental models. We simplify our world and carry it in our heads as images, assumptions, and stories. Example, people are lazy by nature. Mental models shape how we act because they affect what we see. Two people in different mental models can experience the same event but see different details and make different interpretations. There are no right or wrong mental models. The problems arise when they become implicit and we are unaware that they are shaping our thinking and actions. What we are unaware of is we cannot examine and hence cannot change or improve. The discipline starts with turning the mirror inward to discover our own mental models. The third discipline is the shared vision. A vision is truly shared when each person in the organization has similar picture, cares deeply about it, because it reflects their personal vision too, and is connected to others by this common aspiration. So shared vision is crucial for the learning organization because it provides the energy and focus for learning and links people work to a larger purpose embodied in the organization's products and services. It creates alignment between people and organization, creates trust and courage to do what is needed for the vision, and fosters a naturally long-term view in people. The fourth discipline is the team learning. Alignment is a prerequisite to individual empowerment. Empowering individuals when there is a no or low alignment only brings chaos and wastes energy. Team learning aligns and develops the capacity of the team as a whole, building on individual talent and vision, and achieve results that members can't achieve on their own. So, in organizations, team learning involves three key dimensions. Uh, First is the insightful thinking about complex issues, tapping the potential for many minds to be more intelligent than one mind. Number two is innovative and coordinated action, with operational trust in how members can depend on one another to complement their actions. Learning across teams. Team members usually interact and work with other teams too, hence spreading the learning across teams. So, the fifth discipline in Peter Senge's book is the systems thinking, or it is also called the cornerstone of the learning organization that underlies and unifies all five principles. Our education systems have trained us to break down problems into small parts. This makes complex tasks manageable, but we no longer see connections and the big picture. Systems influence behavior. To understand that a thunderstorm, we need to understand the entire ecosystem, not just part of the pattern. To solve problems, we need a shift of mind from seeing parts to wholes, from reacting to creating. It means concurrently seeing the trees and the forest, the detailed and broad patterns. Oh, there are several components to systems thinking, which we elaborate in Peter Senge's book. Uh, These include seeing circles of casuality, including interrelationships and processes of change. And the other one is seeing recurring structures or system archetypes. In particular, the three key components that form system archetypes are A. Reinforcing or amplifying feedback, B. Balancing or stabilizing feedback, and C. Delays. For example, reinforcing feedback are engines of growth that amplify small changes, actions to form vicious or virtuous cycles. Using generative learning through systems thinking, we cannot address issues that we don't see. Once we see the full structures within we operate, we can work with or change them. So in the book explains some of the common archetypes that underlie most management problems, including limits to growth and shifting the burden. Regarding the fifth discipline, the systems thinking, I want you to watch a video clip on how systems thinking work.
Systems thinking, a way to maximize program effectiveness. Systems thinking. Maybe you've heard of it, are doing it, or you've heard that you should be doing it. What is it, and what does it mean for the senior manager? Let's start by looking at what a system is. A system is any kind of entity that is made up of parts that interact. Together, these parts and their interconnections create a whole, which in turn produces some kind of result. Using a systems perspective is important because it helps us to better understand what helps or hinders the success of health interventions. Here's an example. Meet Suzanne. Suzanne is a senior manager in a large regional health organization. The high rate of obesity is an issue in her community, and she's been mandated to address this problem. Her first instinct is to develop a program to get more people active. But what is realistic to expect from this approach? Systems thinkers believe that viewing a program like this, apart, in isolation of the larger system within which it operates, the whole, tends to ignore other aspects that might influence its potential for impact. Why? Research tells us that obesity is the result of a combination of many physiological, psychological, social, environmental, and economic factors that all interact with one another. For example, at the individual level, there are issues such as human physiology, exercise habits, food choices, and one's occupation. But beyond the individual, there are other factors at play, such as the local built environment, quick and easy access to junk food, and larger food industry practices such as trends in portion sizes, sugar, and fat content. The interaction of all these influences make obesity the product of what we call a complex system. If Suzanne were to use a systems approach, she would realize that relying on simple linear cause and effect solutions for one program would ignore those interactions and likely fail. While Suzanne's staff at the program level have a tendency to think only within the boundaries of their program, senior managers and planners like Suzanne are in a unique position to do what systems thinkers call zooming out. Zooming out considers how other aspects outside of a program's traditional boundaries, both within the organization and beyond, might influence the success of the program. By zooming out and looking at the influence of other interventions, policies, structures, patterns, and norms in the broader system, Suzanne is better able to strategically consider other values and perspectives and the interrelationships among each that may impact obesity rates in her community. In doing so, she can identify more powerful leverage points outside of the program that have the potential to facilitate and support changes in obesity. Leverage points are places within the system that can be tweaked in a way that supports greater impact. For example, are there actions Suzanne and her team might take that could increase the community's access to opportunities for physical activity? While some leverage points are within Suzanne's capacity to change, others will be beyond her control. However, it will still be useful to be aware of these as she plans for the program. Adopting a systems view won't change the boundaries of this program, but it will expand the boundaries of the evaluation. By recognizing the importance of the different perspectives and values of those outside the program and the interrelationships throughout the system, Suzanne can ensure that the evaluation is framed in a way that captures the key boundaries, diverse perspectives, and interrelationships that serve as important leverage points in the system. Of course, Suzanne's budget won't permit an evaluation of the entire system, but she can ensure that any evaluation she commissions will provide her with more strategic direction on how to effectively address obesity within her community. For example, in addition to recommendations for improving the program, the results of the evaluation might indicate opportunities for new partnerships or external policy change. If her community has poor walking and cycling infrastructure, where might she and her team advocate? Or who could they collaborate with to make changes? By asking these questions, Suzanne is finding that using a systems approach helps her focus on the broader issue of obesity in her community instead of a single program in her organization. She gains a better understanding of what external factors are influencing the program's success and can set more reasonable expectations of what it can accomplish. She's also learning what needs to change both within and outside of the program to better maximize her organization's effectiveness. Many now believe that a systems approach holds the most promise for addressing complex health problems like obesity, which is not only good for Suzanne, but good for everyone.
Systems thinking is what we call a paradigm. A dictionary definition of a paradigm would read something like this: a worldview underlying the theories and methodology of a particular scientific subject. Thus, we can understand a paradigm to be the foundation that shapes our way of seeing the world. It is the assumptions and methods out of which we build our theories. Now, there are two fundamentally different paradigms within science. One is called analysis and the other synthesis. Analysis is the traditional method of reasoning taken within modern science, whereby we try to gain an understanding of a system by breaking it down into its constituent elements. On the other hand, synthesis, which is the foundation to systems thinking, works in the reverse direction, trying to gain an understanding of an entity through the context of its relations within a whole that it is part of. But let's start by talking a bit about analysis. Analysis is based upon the premise that our basic unit of interest should be the individual parts of a system. From this follows a process of reasoning called reductionism. Reductionism is the process of breaking down or reducing systems to their constituent parts and then describing the whole system primarily as simply the sum of these constituent elements. Reductionism is often described in terms of a three-step process that we use for analyzing things. Firstly, we take something and we break it down into its constituent elements. This is deeply intuitive to us when we wish to understand how a car, bird, or business works. The first thing we do is isolate it by taking it into a garage or lab and decompose it into its constituent parts. Secondly, once we have broken down the system into its most elementary components, we analyze these individual components in isolation in order to describe their properties and their functioning in isolation. Lastly, we recombine these components into the original system that can now be described in terms of the properties of its individual elements. The reductionist approach is the fundamental method behind modern science, and by extension, our modern understanding of the world, and it has proven highly successful in many ways, from understanding atoms and DNA to designing the modern corporation and nation-state. But as successful as it has been, it also has inherent limitations to it. Because we understand systems by breaking the parts down and isolating them, the reductionist paradigm systematically and inherently depromotes the relationships between these components. Thus, within this paradigm of reductionism, the whole system is implicitly thought to be nothing more than the sum of its parts. Thus, analysis works well when there is a low level of interconnectivity and interdependencies within the system we are modeling. Although this may be true for some systems, it is certainly not always the case. Many of the systems we are interested in describing have a high level of interconnectivity and interdependency, examples being ecosystems, computer networks, and many types of social systems. These systems, in contrary, are primarily defined by the relations within the system, and not the static properties of their elements. We can and often do continue to use analysis to try to describe them, but the reductionist approach is not designed for this, and thus we need to change our basic paradigm to one that is more focused upon these relations as opposed to the components, and this is where synthesis and systems thinking comes in. Synthesis means the combination of components or elements to form a connected whole. It is a process of reasoning that describes an entity through the context of its relations and functioning within the whole system that it is a part of. Systems thinking is the process of reasoning called synthesis, and it is also referred to as being what is called holistic, meaning that it is characterized by the belief that the parts of something are intimately interconnected and explicable only by reference to the whole. Thus, synthesis focuses on the relations between the elements, that is to say, the way those elements are put together or arranged into a functioning entirety, and like with analysis, we can also identify a few key stages in this process of reasoning. The first step in the process is to identify the system that our object of interest is a part of. Examples of this might be a bird being part of a broader ecosystem or a person being part of a greater culture. Next, we try to gain a broad outline of how this whole system functions. So, for example, a hard drive is part of a computer, and to properly understand it, we need to have some understanding of the whole computer. Lastly, we try to understand how the parts are interconnected and arranged to function as an entirety. By completing this process, we can identify the relations within which our entity is embedded, its place and function within the whole, and within systems thinking, this context is considered the primary frame of reference for describing something.
So, if we are to integrate the five disciplines reinforce and support one another, integrated by systems thinking. As people practice the discipline of personal mastery, they experience gradual changes, examine their own mental models, became more open, and identify new ways of thinking. Shared vision helps people see how their actions contribute to changing and shaping their future. All three disciplines set the foundation for team learning, which helps team members to create results they desire at a level beyond their individual capability. So, systems thinking underlies all four other disciplines to help us see the big picture and our roles in it, restructure assumptions, and reveal causes and leverage in complex situations. The and leaders in learning organizations are fundamentally designers, teachers, and stewards. As designers, they must engineer the ideas, the vision, purpose, and values that connect, mobilize, and focus its people, evolving learning and IT infrastructures. As teachers, they must help people to see gaps, balance short and long term solutions, and demonstrate a learning spirit. As stewards, they serve a larger purpose with commitment and focus. And that would be all for the summary of Peter Senge's book, The Fifth Discipline. I hope you learned something, and that's all. Thank you.